So in today's worksheet, you'll need to use this simulation right here. So this simulation is going to be used throughout the remaining of the unit, and it shows you different things that we'll be observing. So one of them being wind currents. So for wind currents, you want to have the mode on air, animate wind, and then the height. So you'll see different values for the height. So this first one right here, SFC, this is pretty much at sea level. So these are the temperatures right here that you might be looking at. So these colors that you see right here, these are the temperatures. If we want to look at wind, we can look at what directions these winds are going. So these green regions right here show us in what directions wind is more concentrated. So you can see that right there with the wind that's kind of squished together. And then the blue areas are where there is less air flowing, right? So you'll normally see this. And this right here is how wind is flowing pretty much at sea level. If I click at this one right here, this one shows us how wind is flowing 100 meters above sea level. So then if I continue on moving right here, clicking the next one and the next one, this is showing us how wind is moving at different heights. So the height is increasing. This one being the furthest from sea level. So the highest one would be this one right here. So this is what we're really seeing really high up in the atmosphere. This is how air is behaving, how air is flowing. So you guys can make observations on how air is flowing at very high altitudes, pretty much reaching the limit of our atmosphere right here. And as we're going down towards the surface, you can see how air is flowing differently. So you start seeing different patterns, you start seeing different shapes, different motion of how that wind is flowing. So on your diagrams, on the 2D diagrams, when you're comparing, you'll notice some similarities and some differences as to how wind is moving. So some of these patterns, like these wave motions right here, you'll see this on the diagrams. Let's go a little bit lower, so you'll see more here. Or around the equator, you'll see that wind flows contrary to the Earth's rotation. So you'll see wind moving towards the west, like this right here, instead of along with the Earth's rotation. So that's what you're observing on the diagrams right there. We can change this, right? So let's leave it at the surface. Right here, the green colors are showing wind. The blue colors are showing where there's less wind. If we click on temperature, it's going to change the colors. So we can make comparisons with how the wind is flowing and what directions it's flowing, and the temperatures of the Earth. So you guys can see that here around the equator is relatively hot, and around the poles it's colder, and in the South Pole it's colder as well. So right here we can make observations how wind is flowing in certain regions. So if you remember seeing in the temperature map of Africa in certain seasons got extremely hot. And then we can also see why that is, right? We can see how wind is behaving at different heights. So this is pretty much 100 meters above the surface, above sea level. Then you have this right here. And you can see why Africa might be very arid. Winds normally circulate at very high altitudes and not low altitudes. And then we can make comparisons to countries that are a bit more tropical. So let's try making observations here. So we're seeing wind flow a lot lower. So there's definitely a lot more wind where we encounter tropical rainforests. So you can see that right there. Very, very low. You don't see that much wind. Maybe that could have to do with the vegetation, the amount of vegetation and trees in that region. But right here, we do see at this altitude, we do have lots of winds. Whereas if we compare it to over here, we have less wind, right? And then we see more wind currents the higher the altitude. So you guys can play around with this. The height, this one being the sea level, 100 meters above the ground. And we can look at the different, we can compare different overlays, right? So this is the one for temperature, this is the one for wind. For these down here, projection, we'll be working with this one right here, which is our sphere, our globe, and then this one right here. So you guys can make observations on everything on this one. You can play around with the others just to see how they're different. But we're focusing on these two right here, the one that has the O and the P. Make sure that you're working with now, like this is the current time that we're working with, and you guys can see that right here. Like we can make observations that this is in fact December, where the north is pointing away from the sun and the south is pointing towards the sun. So you might see a little bit of warmer areas over here than you would up here. If you guys want to see, for example, where the sun is hitting the earth, you can see that right here. So this is ultraviolet index. So we can see where the sun is hitting the earth at this time. So at this moment it is 9 o'clock in the morning. So we have some amount of radiation. So it's morning here in Nicaragua. And this is going to be moving with the clock, right, with time. So it's working with real time. So this red spot that you see here, this is where all the radiation is hitting right now. So you can see that the sun is hitting the south during this month of December. So the south will receive more radiation and the north will receive less. So the sun is hitting the north less, right? The north is pointing away from the sun. So make sure you play around with some of these options. You don't have to look for ocean currents yet. We're not doing anything related to ocean current. We will be using this one right here for chemicals, especially for CO2. So we can see CO2 and how that's moving along with wind currents. So this just shows you how CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere are flowing. And we'll be using this much later. So if you have any questions, you guys can let me know in class.